all for joining us today. We are going to talk about how this panel is related to from orbit to Earth, SpaceTech and its impact potential. And for many years, we have seen the space sector as a very distant activity. We talk about exploration of the universe, astronauts, core technology in space. But actually, now we are seeing that the space activity is becoming closer and closer to our daily lives, and we are going to discuss about this impact in our daily lives. How big this impact is, how long is the impact, and when this has changed as such. For this discussion, I'm very happy to have here Alexander Gunkel from Earth for Good. Maybe you can explain afterwards a bit about your company, and Rodolfo Contessa, his principal at Armilar Venture Partners. Very nice to have you here. So maybe you can present yourself. I think it will be much better than if I do it.
Yeah. All right. Hi, my name is Alexander Gunkel. I'm a serial entrepreneur, having started 3 SpaceTech spin-offs from the European Space Agency. Space for Good is the one I started around 10 years ago. Here we use satellite Earth observation, so satellites in space, little cameras looking at Earth, in order to drive social and environmental impact. We're working across a lot of different sectors and topics, so I hope I can give you some practical applications and examples during the talk.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo.
Sure. Armilar is a VC fund. We're based in Lisbon, Portugal, and we invest throughout Europe. We're currently deploying from a Series A fund. It's not a space tech fund, but we do look at space as one of the areas of interest. Myself, I'm an aerospace engineer with a background in space, having worked in a company Noelia founded many years ago, and also been a YGT like Alex at STech.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I wanted to start with Alex. When we talk about impact of the space activities into daily life, to make it tangible, how can you explain which is the most impact, the larger impact that you are seeing on the space activity? Because your company is working closely with real problems on Earth.
Mm-hmm. So I think SpaceTech impacts us on a lot of different levels. I think the first one, and really important one, is actually inspiration. I think that's what maybe brought you here. Some might be working in the space sector, but I think a few of you will be actually here just because you're curious and maybe you have been engaging in space when you were young. But there's a lot of practical connection points. And I think by now we have almost every hour at least one touch point with SpaceTech. Either we check our weather, we are navigating, we are accessing internet or phoning in remote areas, or we use advanced materials, which actually have been first developed for space applications. In our case, with Space for Good, we use satellite observation to monitor our Earth for social and environmental impact. So what does this mean practically? We're supporting nature conservation organizations to detect where illegal deforestation is happening. We are working with governments to help them prepare and react on natural catastrophes like flooding or fires. We are working with food and agriculture companies who need to be compliant with new regulations and basically want to know about their supply chain to make sure that the things we order arrive in time and in quality. And we also work with farmers to actually advise them when to irrigate their crops and when to harvest them. So there's a lot of applications right now. There will be many more coming in the future. And I think that's also why we're here, in order to promote the services which are already developed here in Europe, and make sure that Europe doesn't fall behind, because it has effects on us as a citizen, it has an effect on us as businesses, but now we're also starting realizing it also has more and more effect as Europe from a political level, since we realize we cannot rely on old partners like the US and Russia, but we have to build up our own systems, our own strengths in order to not fall behind.
Yeah, maybe we can go later on with this collaboration or aspects, no? And this or the current status of the politics. But before we go to that, Rodolfo, from an investor perspective, Alexander was mentioning about new materials, data we use from space, so many different aspects. you, as an investor, are we still looking at space tech as a distant thing or a really interesting aspect to invest on?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a big question because there are many types of investors that are now investing in space technology. So you have very focused funds that are doing exclusively space technologies, or these days aerospace and defense technologies. You have deep tech generalists, which is where I think Armilar would fit. We look at many different sectors, and space is one of them because it's one of the disruptive areas that we see with long-term potential. And then you have very broad later stage investors that space tech really needs because of their infrastructure costs. I think we have matured to a point where investing in space is no longer an exotic thing like it was maybe 10 years ago. I don't think it is yet as a point of investing in internet companies or the cloud or AI. I think there's still a very, well, at least welcome degree of expertise that is required. But I think we're moving closer and closer to space just being part of the infrastructure of any sort of sector that we would naturally invest in. And that's the sign of maturity of this ecosystem. And I think it's a very good thing. And I hope that soon enough there will not be space tech committees or space tech events specifically, and space will just be an embedded element of any sort of investment thesis, I think.
Yeah, actually, I fully agree. It's it's a layer, an infrastructure layer, which is supporting many other sectors, right? And you mentioned another thing about AI and other technologies, which, and this question is probably for Alexander more, is space is not working alone, right? We were discussing before, is the important thing is the stack of technologies that we put all together. How do you see this combination of AI, cloud technologies, and how these support the value of the space data, the space information?
Mm-hmm. So I think when it comes to space tech, there's always going to be also the satellite in space, right? And if you speak about space data, it means that we need to have special instruments developed working in space. It means we have to have a satellite which carries this instrument. It means we need rockets to bring it all up. And that's like kind of hardcore space tech, and that's amazing. But then from this data which is being generated, it's also getting better and better, right? We have now optical satellites which make pictures where you can see whether a window is open or not, right? And that's just optical. There's many more sensors, whether it's radar, it's infrared, hyperspectral. But indeed, the value for businesses is then usually when you start turning this data into insights, into intelligence. And then to give you a practical example, how Space for Good is supporting commercial forestry companies, we combine optical satellite data with radar satellite data and ground truth data, then crunch it all together with available geoinformation, elevation data, seasonality, price data, in order to help forest companies to identify where deforestation is happening right now, but also predict where deforestation is happening in the future, so they know where they can send the forest guards, where they can enforce their patrols, where they can set up watchtowers. And at the end, they need to save money or they have to make more money. I think that is this combination, this verticalization, where space becomes one layer among many. But then I think the challenge which space tech companies are facing, that's all technology engineering, right? And I think what we're missing often, having an engineering background or a science background, is that you need to think about business engineering. You have to think about process engineering, operational engineering, to make sure that this data and insights are actually turning into action, so that the map, the report I'm providing is actually really being integrated into the day-to-day operations. So I think that is where the biggest opportunity is, now turning these insights into actions.
Sure. What I have a doubt more on the investor side is when a company approaches you and they told you, as Alexander mentioned, we are a space tech company, but we are also doing AI and we have some dual activities. It looks like confusing, no? It looks like one company, a small company, a startup, is doing too many things. Is that confusing, or on the other side, you think it gives you more value for investing in a company like that?
I would go back to an expression Alex used, which is like this business engineering. So in the context of this business engineering, I think it's very much welcome as long as all of these parts, mean something to an end user that is willing to pay. I think that, there are, like Alexander also said, there are these hardcore space tech, and these will continue to exist, right? The rockets, the satellites, the ground radar, the space, the ground stations. A few years ago, that scared me, which was, we're a company doing blockchain, AR, AI, and some, NFTs in the middle. That was scary. But I think that in the case of space, unless you are a hardcore, and we would go back to the legacy players, which I'm not sure is the way we're going forward, you do need to have the full stack to provide some kind of service or product to the end user. And whether it's space data or space activity itself, one of the two, they all need different elements. And AI is a clear example. There's nothing that you're able to do in space these days that does not involve some kind of AI, either for mission planning or even collision avoidance or data analysis. So AI is electricity these days. As is new materials as well. So I'm not scared at all if a founder comes up with different technologies being embedded. What I'm a little bit more scared of is, as space engineers, we're all kind of in love with this idea, right? Which is fantastic, it's great, but we need to be in love with the client more than the technology itself. And for us, I think it's, as engineers, it's very hard. But as investors, that's the only thing that really matters. And especially for a fund like ours that is not space-focused, when a space technology company comes to us, it competes with a fintech, it competes with a AI platform, it competes with digital health. So these space tech entrepreneurs, and I think that we're going in that direction very intensively, they need to be as commercially oriented as any other founder. And I think it's coming. It'll take a little bit of time, but it's welcome, I would say.
Yeah, I want to come back to something you mentioned is we have legacy companies doing probably the core things. We have legacy technologies. We have been developing many technologies in the past, and we keep on developing technologies. What the sector needs to become a real business sector instead of a collection of beautiful technologies, powerful technologies, amazing things that we can do, and amazing programs, institutional programs that are supporting these developments. What's missing in the sector to become a real business sector and to have that impact? Yeah, for you it's fine. Then Alexander can also.
I think we need to be pragmatic as well. So we're, if we have to go back in time to understand where we are today, especially in Europe. And if we go back in time, we have a huge lag with respect, at least to the US. I mean, Russia these days is obviously, for very obvious reasons, lagging behind. But in Europe, we started later. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there has been tremendous work done, especially by the European Space Agency as an intergovernmental organization, to try to bring a unified sort of, at least institutional program. And the success with Ariane that now a lot of people criticize, but the success with Ariane and many elements that have built what is today's industry have brought us to where we are. And where we are is we have a few legacy big companies, a lot of them associated with governments, still as owners of these companies. And what these companies have done is they've put Europe at least in a similar level playing field, at least from a technology and somewhat industry level, right? And so if we go forward in time, and what I think is missing in the European ecosystem at least, is this sense of, first of all, a one market for space, or at least as close to possible as a one market for space, and this is both commercial, institutional, and military, which is very hard to do, but I don't think that unless we have some kind of coordination mechanism, it's going to be very, very hard. So that's the one thing. And the other thing I think is time. I think we just need time, right? The US has started earlier, both in space and in entrepreneurship in general. And I think we're catching up in our own way and with our own defaults and advantages, but we're catching up and we're seeing a lot of companies breaking out, new space companies as we call them. So I would say these two things, there's an institutional layer that needs to be put in place, at least as a coordination mechanism to make this a one European space ecosystem. And the second is, I really think time. Time and capital will make up for a bit of our lag. I think, I don't know, this is more Alexander's.
Yeah. No, I don't think I have something to add here.
Yeah, good. And coming to this one institutional entity, I think we have a clear difference with other regions. If we compare with US, Rodolfo, you already mentioned that. In US, they have Department of Defense with big investments and also a unified political institutional infrastructure. Here in Europe, we have different countries with their national legislation institutions. We have European Space Agency with some member states, the European Union with its own program and its own agency for a space program. So is this a barrier? Can we get some benefit from this diversity of institutions? Or do you think this barrier is preventing the companies in Europe, in space, catching up, as you mentioned, the American ones? Maybe Alexander.
There's a risk of fragmentation, right? But I think that's where we indeed have this intergovernmental organizations like the European Space Agency and OISPA, and now also the European Commission having a stronger say in European programs, which are for the benefit of several member states. Because Space for Good is a business, so our focus is on the client. And I think when I look here into Europe, we actually have a lot of really interesting clients, right? That means we have finance institutions which need to comply with new regulations and who want to deploy capital, for example, to invest into nature-based solutions all around the world. We have food and agriculture giants over here in Europe, who are getting concerned about their supply chains and basically want to start monitoring them in order to make them more resilient. We have huge construction entities, right? So for me, it's, I look at Europe as a great pool of potential partnerships, but I look at the client of trying to figure out, hey, what do they need? And instead of developing a complete vertical implementation like SpaceX, like where they develop the rockets, the software, everything themselves, my first intuition also as a European would say, hey, who in Europe is doing the best thing when it comes to data processing? Who is the best organization who helps me with the relevant sensor on the ground? Who is the best organization who can help me crunch particular data? And then form consortia. And of course, in a way, it's more complex, but I think if we manage this complexity, I think maybe that is the European success recipe in order to compete with China or with Europe, with the US.
Yeah, and when I asked before what we need to become from a collection of technologies to a real market, I think probably the most important part of a real market is to have the customers and to have the adoption of these technologies by the customers. From your perspective, which is the critical issue for adoption of these space data, space technology, space-related technologies? Is the cost, is the price, is the quality, is the demonstration of impact, which is the current barrier or the major factor? Yeah.
So what we've been observing over the years is that most organizations, or most individuals, they would love to experiment with space data. Hey, you're going to have this astropreneur coming into the to the team, to the company, and going to do a proof of concept, a pilot. But I think that has been also where it often stopped, where it didn't progress. And I think the solution is here to not only come with the technology, but really understand the process from A to Z even better than your client. Because at the end, you're not only innovating around technology, you have to start innovating in their decision-making, in their planning, in their management. And I think that's a new skill which we as kind of space entrepreneurs need to learn, or we have to start inviting other minds, other skills, other team members in organizations in order to think more business and more process.
Yeah, good. And I think you already put the idea, or make clear the idea that we are already using the technology. It's becoming a market. It's having impact already on ground. But we are still aerospace engineers, right? And we still want to create the new big thing in space. And nowadays, I'm listening every day new technologies or the evolution of the space sector in new technologies like space infrastructure for edge computing. For those who are not that related to the space sector, normally we deployed satellites on space, we capture images, for example, we download the images, and we process those images on ground in order to get the important information for taking decisions. Nowadays, we are moving more and more the computation into the satellite. The satellites become the computer that process those images. Not completely, but we are also discussing to put the whole computing infrastructure into the satellites, not only for processing our images, our space data, but also to have data centers in space. There are some people pushing for data centers in space because we could solve some problems of energy consumption, refrigeration of these data centers on ground. From an investor perspective, how do you see these future technologies? Something interesting to invest now, or just looking from a distant side?
I think the simple answer is I don't know.
Good.
The more complex one is still I don't know, but I think we're going to go through, those who are more into space, we're going to go through a very interesting time in this sector with the IPO of SpaceX. So there's a lot that's going to come up because of the IPO of SpaceX. And one of the things that is going to come up is, if you go through the prospectus, is the data centers in space, which the company attaches a lot of value in their IPO. I think that, to dismiss any of Elon Musk's claims too soon is probably risky, because this is a guy who sent a roadster to space. But I think that, so just to understand why data centers in space may or may not make sense, there's a cost associated with maintaining a data center on Earth, right? There's the energy cost, and then there's the refrigeration cost. And the simple story is, if you put some GPUs in space in a very simple way, and if you have a sun-synchronous orbit with big arrays, you can get free energy. And space is very cold, so you can refrigerate, which is not true, because you need conductivity or convection, which doesn't exist in space, and so you still need to radiate it, and you have to have huge radiators. Then you also need radiation-hardened microelectronics, which is something also not obvious, and you also need the ability to basically downlink all the data and uplink all the data. So just to say that if you build an Excel model with certain assumptions, it makes a lot of sense. Whether those assumptions are real or not is where it's anybody's guess. What I do think is going to happen is, probably in a spectrum of technology and business development, we're probably going to see more and more onboard autonomy in satellites and space infrastructure. I think one of the elements you quite accurately pointed is, and part of the reason why it's valuable, is that the downlink budget is costly. And so if you can prevent from downlinking everything and analyze it on Earth, if you can select which images to see, if you just want to know if that window is open, you don't need to look at the whole city, right? So that's logical, and that's already being done. There's a lot of it about satellite autonomy and collision avoidance. And what I think we're going to see is, as time goes by and these use cases become proven, it may be the case that one day we will have some kind of data centers in space. But as an investor, yeah, I'm ignorant to whether the economics are there yet to make an investment. But again, to dismiss Elon Musk is probably a risk I don't want to take.
Yeah, not on a stage.
Not on this stage.
Yeah, Alexander, from your perspective, this processing on satellite, do you think it will increase the impact of the technology on Earth? The data we can use here, it will be more impactful?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it reduces the latency, and as we said, hey, now we're going to have edge computing in space, like it's really space edge. I mean, it's already impressive, and instead of indeed sending the data down to the ground station where it needs to be processed, where it has to be analyzed, where it has to be disseminated, it can sometimes take several days, right? And if there's a fire, like you basically want to tell the firefighting units as quickly as possible where they have to go and where not, right? And maybe speaking then about the processing centers, I mean, we all know about the hype cycles. And I think when it comes to space, then it's always super hype cycle. So it's an inspirational place as well. I think it just should draw talents to like come together to innovate and develop technologies which we can also use across sectors.
Yeah. We are running out of time, so before we go to the final question, I would like to discuss a bit on sustainability. And how do you see the space sector in relation with sustainability? Probably for your application, I think you have a clear view on what the space sector can do for Earth. And maybe Roberto, from the investments you are doing, you can have maybe an idea on sustainability, which is a bit different, right? Alexander?
Yeah. For me personally, I was always really inspired by the Mir and then later on the International Space Station, because this is where astronauts from all around the world were coming together, like in doing research for the good of humanity, right? And I think that needs to be our vision. No, that is the goal we should be working towards again, and I think that is being maybe lost a little bit in recent conversations, which are happening here in Europe, which are happening in the US, which are happening in Russia and China. But at the end, I want to have the International Space Station again. And I think Europe can have a really important role here. Like we're already developing amazing satellites, and we're actually offering the data for free for everyone and for the biggest kind of social and environmental challenges. And I think this is already amazing. I think what Europe has to get better in is to make use of this data to turn this also into business opportunity, because this is going to create a huge economic opportunity for Europe, but it's also going to amplify our geopolitical relevance.
That's correct, yeah?
I have very little trying to bring a little bit of a different perspective, and this is more of a personal take on sustainability, right? So it's been underused and overused significantly and taken advantage of by political spectrum through left and right. What I think about sustainability and space in particular is, one, it needs to be fact-based. Second, it needs to be holistic, and it needs to be something that people are willing to adopt. Because what I mean by this is there's a lot of ungrounded studies about what is sustainable or not. That's the first thing, and we need to put scientists to work, and economists as well. The other thing is sustainability is not just about the ecosystem and the bio ecosystem. It's also about security. It's also about access to food. It's also, and we've discussed this previously, so we need to be mindful that for some people, sustainability may mean different things. And if we don't take all of these into consideration, we end up being put to one or the other box, which I think is negative. And the other thing is, people need to embrace it. If it is pure regulation, if it's pure legislation, I think, it's a matter of days until some other party takes that advantage to get votes for something else. So it needs to be adopted by overall. So I think full circle, I didn't add anything, but it's more of a holistic, I think, approach to sustainability.
To finish, because we are over time, only one word or two words for letting us know which will be, in your opinion, the biggest impact of space tech in next 5 years.
For me, it's two things.
Okay.
It's the GeoAI, so artificial intelligence. You can work in geospatial contexts, and I think for Europe, it is sustainability. It's the green transition we're committed to. It is the data which we're already generating, and now if we can also turn this into business applications, I think we're already creating our own markets with the regulations and the conditions we have to implement here. Now, for all the entrepreneurs here in the room, if you can make it as seamless as possible for people and for businesses, then this doesn't become an issue anymore. Then it becomes a competitive advantage.
Okay.
I would just say economic growth, as opposed to simple geopolitical battling.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Rodolfo, Alexander, and thanks for all of you for joining us. I think it's clear SpaceTech has its impact now. It will have even longer impact in the future, but only if it's integrated with these other technologies to become the infrastructure for the whole economy, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.